The United States is currently conducting strategic malpractice to such an extent that our national security is being unnecessarily put at risk. With American actions in both the Russia-Ukraine war and the Israeli-Hamas war, our actions are so disconnected from reality as to be incomprehensible. It's just shocking to what we're doing. It's hard to even come to grips with just how bad our actions are and how literally disconnected from ground truth reality they are. All of this is putting us into a position to where we face the real potential through a series of lies, intentional distortions, and shockingly bad analysis that we are facing a strategic defeat for our country, or worse, a war. We could literally get sucked into a war that we should never fight and that is not in our interest at all. Right now, the situation is that there is no path on these two major issues, and we could talk about the China-Taiwan issue because it falls into the same kind of category, but it's not as acute right now because of things that are going on the ground. But there is no path that our government right now is on where we come out on top, where America is strengthened and secured. We must make some major changes right now, or there is the high probability that something very bad happens to our country. And that is just hard for me to understand. As I was talking to Gary before we went on the air here, I just turned 61 years old, and I've gone through the Cold War. I fought in the Cold War. I fought in wars in Iraq, in Afghanistan. And I've been doing this for a long time. I've been doing on television, talking about foreign policy issues for 6 or 7 years now. And I am shocked at the degradation that I've seen in the country over the last maybe 10 or 12 years, but over the last year especially. It's just hard to fathom how bad things have gotten. And let's get into it to show you how. Now, one of I think the fundamental reasons why the elite in Washington have gotten into this position that we're at is because we have this belief that we're incapable of defeat. We can do anything that we want because we want to. If we decide that the earth is no longer round because that just doesn't fit our preference, then we'll just say it's not round. And if we say it enough, it'll just become true. And of course, it doesn't matter what you say. The earth is round. There are some things that you can massage. There are some things you can influence, and you can move things in one direction or another. But what you can't do is change reality. What you can't do is ignore things that are true on the ground, and then from Washington, D.C., just have this fantasy view that you can just change reality around by words and in saying with enough emphasis on camera, and that somehow that's going to make a difference. Because, folks, when reality runs into spin, reality will eventually win. We saw this play out most recently in Afghanistan in 2021, and it was a humiliation for our country, but it was entirely predictable. The cost in that one was really bad for the Afghan people, the Afghan government, the Afghan military, and then all the people who have since. And it was humiliating and shameful for us because the people that we were against for 20 years, the Taliban, are in charge to this day. That one was bad. Now then, we're at a place where it could be catastrophic for us. And I'm going to play this clip here. I've played a few times by the president, but not just to point out to him individually. If it were only one person, this would be more manageable. But what he says here is broadly believed by a whole section of American elite in Washington, D.C., among the foreign policy and the political elite. And this doesn't matter, Republican, Democrat, they all follow this. Many people agree when President Biden says this thing.
We're the United States of America, for God's sake. The most powerful nation in the history, not in the world, in the history of the world. The history of the world.
And we're not. Okay, we're a very strong nation. See, if we just acknowledge the truth that we are very powerful, we have a large nuclear triad, we have a great Air Force, Navy, strong ground forces with the Army and Marine Corps. We have the ability to project power like probably nobody else on the earth does. We can do a lot, but it's not unlimited. There are limits to what we can do, and there are reasonable things that we should not do because there are other powers that exist in the world: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, the global South, Europe. There are many other areas that have their own interest and now then their own powers. And people are starting to have a lot less interest in just doing what they're told by Washington. Now, a lot of that is because of decades of malpractice, going all the way back to Clinton, Bush, Obama, the Trump administration. There are no clean hands in this. Some have been worse than others. Some have been better in some areas, but we've all been kind of going in this direction where we've been just slowly degrading our reputation and credibility in the world, both among our friends and our adversaries, at the same time, and giving impetus to our adversaries growing in power, economic and military power. So they're not just going to be told what to do anymore because they don't have to. They actually have the capacity to push back. Well, first, let's take a look at the Israeli part of this, the Israeli-Hamas war. That's something that happened because of October 7th, the terrorist attack by Hamas against Israel. And anyone in the world, and initially almost everyone in the world, did recognize that Israel had a right to defend itself against these terrorists who slaughtered lots of innocent people, most famously at that open-air concert. But what Israel did in response, how they handled it, was not okay. And it started going against American national security quickly. You may remember early on, President Biden, actually, to his credit, went out there, and I think within days, and said to Israel, don't make the same mistake we did. Don't get carried away by the emotion after 10/7 like we did after 9/11 and overreact to these kind of things. He gave a warning to that. It was, of course, ignored because it appears that many in Israel have said, all right, they're tired of this stuff and this problem they have with Palestine, so they're going to eliminate Palestine once and for all, and they've been going on this genocidal killing spree. Well, it finally got to a head because now that enough people in the United States are finally saying enough is enough, and even Democratic supporters of the president says, no, we're not going to support that anymore. You got to do something. So we sent Secretary of State Blinken in late March to Israel to talk to Netanyahu to say, hey, this whole thing now, you're getting into the last part here, Rafah, where there's like over 1 million people. If you go into there militarily, like you said you're going to, many more people are going to die. We can't do that. We can't keep giving you weapons and aircraft and all kinds of support if it's going to end up killing all these innocent people. I wish it was because of the morality of it, but from the administration perspective, because of the electoral issue among their voters heading into November. So I believe it was the 22nd of March, Blinken flew to Tel Aviv to meet with Netanyahu and said this on the tarmac.
We also talked about Rafah. We share Israel's goal of defeating Hamas, which is responsible for the worst massacre of the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And we share the goal of ensuring Israel's long-term security. As we've said, though, a major military ground operation in Rafah is not the way to do it. It risks killing more civilians. It risks wreaking greater havoc with the provision of humanitarian assistance. It risks further isolating Israel around the world and jeopardizing its long-term security and standing.
Okay, that makes sense. That actually was pretty reasonable what he said in public there. That was reinforced 2 days later by the Vice President of the United States, Vice President Harris, when she said this in an interview.
We have been clear in multiple conversations and in every way that any major military operation in Rafah would be a huge mistake. Let me tell you something. I have studied the maps. There's nowhere for those folks to go. And we're looking at about 1.5 million people in Rafah who are there because they were told to go there, most of them. And so we've been very clear that it would be a mistake to move into Rafah with any type of military operation.
A mistake, but would there be consequences if he does move forward?
Well, we're going to take it one step at a time, but we've been very clear in terms of our perspective on whether or not that should happen.
Are you ruling out that there would be consequences from the United States?
I am ruling out nothing.
But she's also not ruling in anything either. So you had the Secretary of State fly there, don't go into Rafah. It's time to make some changes. You had the Vice President say you can't do this, or implied that there could be consequences. And in response to this, what does Netanyahu say?
אמרתי לו שאני מאוד מעריך את העובדה שיותר מ5 חודשים אנחנו עומדים יחד במלחמה נגד החמאס. אמרתי לו גם שאנחנו מכירים בצורך לפנות את האוכלוסייה האזרחית מאזורי המלחמה, וכמובן לדאוג גם לצרכים ההומניטריים, אנחנו פועלים לשם כך. אבל גם אמרתי שאין לנו דרך לנצח את החמאס בלי להיכנס לרפיח ולחסל את שארית הגדודים שם. ואמרתי לו שאני מקווה שנעשה את זה בתמיכה של ארצות הברית, אבל אם נצטרך, נעשה זאת לבד.
So he's like, yeah, thank you for your information and your personal opinion, Mr. Blinken, but we're going to do whatever we want to do. But you're going to keep giving us all the stuff that we asked for. And of course we are. So the vice president implied maybe there'll be consequences, but she wouldn't say there were. And there haven't been. So I think it was a few days after this that Israel launched a large attack into Syria, where they killed about 40 people, mostly Syrian soldiers in Aleppo, because they claimed there was something going on there that implied there's security. We don't really know. We never know what was going on. All we know is that they attacked into a foreign country and killed their military soldiers. Now imagine what American would do if our soldiers were killed. You don't have to imagine. We do it all the time. Anytime someone kills our soldiers, we go back and retaliate, right? Then 3 days later, then Israel goes and I think it was yesterday, attacked an embassy, an Iranian embassy in the capital city of Syria, in Damascus, and kills a number of their top generals and diplomatic personnel. And Israel then just kind of like says, yeah, we're not going to talk about it. That's what they say. We don't discuss those kinds of things. Then in the Gaza Strip, there was a bunch of aid workers that were executed and shot. And Israel's like, we'll check into that. Do you see over and over, there is no consequences to anything. Who's running this show? It's clearly not the people in Washington, but folks, we're tied to all of that. And when people see that, like earlier in today's news, in addition to the 25 F-35s we offered last week, now 50 F-15s, an additional $18 billion. $18 billion the president wants to give to Israel. That's what we keep offering. That's our so-called consequences. Now, when people see this, and especially in the region, we had Colonel Doug McGregor on earlier today, and he was talking about some of these things. And he said, look, when people see that America supports Israel and it happens, these things have blowback on us as well. And especially in terms of this attack against the embassy, which is unprecedented. Nobody does that. There is a Geneva Convention, and so far everybody, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, they've never attacked an embassy. For all the terrorist attacks that have been done, they haven't gone against embassies, at least not any of ours. But now then here, our ally has gone after embassy. Now, Iran, just hours ago, I saw in some of the Middle Eastern media, is saying that they're going to go and make a retaliation. They're saying they're not going to let this stand. Now, Israel may think that this is going to cow people down. I don't know, because it's also possible that they actually want to expand the war, that they want to draw the United States in there so that instead of us talking about standing against, anything that they're doing in Rafah, that we'll be in the war with them and that we won't have any choice but to completely support. And of course, that's what Israel wants. They want all of their enemies wiped out in the Middle East so that they can live at peace. And if that means drawing America into a war, they're okay with that. Well, folks, I'm not okay with that. There doesn't need to be any war. And especially one that the United States gets sucked into. I mean, we saw a disaster for 20 years in Afghanistan. We saw a continuing disaster in Iraq. We're still there today. We went in March of 2003, and we're still there to this day. And any talk about pulling them out, everybody in the elite Washington always says, no, we can't do that. We have to have them there for fill in the blank. They make up all kinds of reasons, and the reasons always change, but they keep them there. That's those two. So you're talking more than 2 decades of those two disasters. And you want to get us sucked into one that's even bigger against a country that, by the way, is not like Iraq, is not like Afghanistan. They actually have a very powerful missile capability. They can, in fact, damage us. Their air power is very weak, but they do have some air defense. But their missile forces especially, they do have speedboats. They can mine the Straits of Hormuz, which could just devastate the global economy. Why in God's name would the United States want to even toy with the possibility of having things escalate out to there? Whose benefit is that in? It's not America's. It's not yours. It's Israel's and Israel's alone. But as I keep saying, it's not even in their interest, because no matter what they think, this is disaster for Israel. If it goes down this path, they're not going to succeed. They're not going to be able to literally kill everyone in the Middle East that they don't like. That's a twisted mentality. It's never going to work. All they're going to do is gain more enemies and more violence for their people. As Ambassador Chaz Freeman said on this show not long ago, these are seeds that are being planted they're already done. These things are going to be sprouting for a long time to come and throughout this region. There's already enormous damage done to Israel's long-term security that can't be undone by anything. Even if we started acting sane today, we're not going to be able to do it because of all the damage that we've done up to this point. But folks, it could get a lot worse. Now, that's just one theater. That's in the Israeli-Hamas war. Now let's look over at what has the even bigger potential for it to go bad and sideways, and that is the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, early off in this war, we had Secretary of State Austin go publicly on television and without embarrassment say that we're helping Ukraine, but our objective, America's objective, is to cause harm to Russia.
I want to see Ukraine remain a sovereign country, a democratic country, able to protect its sovereign territory. We want to see Russia weakened to the degree that it can't do the kinds of things that it has done in invading Ukraine. So,
and look, that was so foolish because that's a temporary condition. Russia underestimated the ability of the Ukraine side to resist. They underestimated the scale of the problem that they had. They overestimated their own capacity, and the initial operations, especially through the first 6 to 9 months, were embarrassing to sometimes just disastrous for the Russian side. But it was always clear from the beginning that was going to be a temporary condition. Russian history has often started wars of disaster, just horrible. But then they almost always recover and get stronger as a result of it. And you don't have to look any further than the Russian natural resources. They have the ability to have industrial capacity. Their manpower pool is quite large, certainly orders of magnitude larger than the Ukraine side. And they have the knowledge and experience of a larger troop force to begin with. And their training capacity is bigger. Their intelligence, literally everything you want to look at showed that they had the capacity to absorb these huge losses that they had and to recover and to get stronger. So if your objective is to weaken Russia, it's ironic that we had a chance to do that. If we had encouraged and insisted that Ukraine make a negotiated settlement in March, April of 2022, Russia would have exited weakened because they had already lost literally hundreds, if not thousands of armored vehicles, thousands of troops. They were embarrassed. They had not yet mobilized, so they hadn't replaced a lot of these losses. Russia would have been weakened for a long time to come, and Putin would have taken a hit among his people because they would have saw that you didn't really succeed in anything here and it came at enormous cost. And who knows what would have happened in the presidential election if things had stayed where they were. But they didn't. Instead, we continued on and we pressed even harder and refused to have a negotiated settlement. And then we started saying, you know what? This is where the spin parts comes into, and where I talk about the intentional deception that we inflict on our own people, by the way, on you. Let's be clear on this. This is intentional misinformation by the U.S. government against you, because you've heard it many times on regular media and here on this channel about how the Russia's attack was unprovoked.
The Russian military has begun a brutal assault on the people of Ukraine. Without provocation, without justification.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine is an unprovoked war of aggression.
Russia's unprovoked, unwarranted war on Ukraine has kicked off a humanitarian crisis.
We are united in condemning the Kremlin's unprovoked aggression.
Це злочинна та неспровокована агресія Росії проти нашої нації.
Ukraine is facing a barbaric, unprovoked military assault.
Putin's latest attack on Ukraine was premeditated and totally unprovoked. He rejected repeated efforts at diplomacy.
We are not going to boost any security agreements or start any security agreements with the government of Russia, a government that we have seen invade one of its neighbors unprovoked.
Only it wasn't unprovoked. Now, you can make an argument that Russia shouldn't have attacked and that the provocations were not high enough for that. That's an argument that's valid to have. But you can't say it was unprovoked and totally premeditated, because that's what they want you to believe. The point being that Russia is this evil person that you can't have any negotiations with. I've seen so many on the news actually claim that Russia has rejected any kind of negotiations, and they don't even want peace. All they do is want to fight. Well, that's not true. As a matter of fact, it was the West, not Russia, that from 2015 on in the Ukraine situation said, here's this Minsk agreements that we signed. But then later the German and the French leaders admitted that they never intended to agree by those terms. They just wanted to help Ukraine buy time. Then in March 2021, after Zelensky had been elected president, he signed a decree that called for the return of the occupied territories in the Donbass and Crimea. And of course, that's always been a major red line for Putin. And that's when he started building up power. The next month, Ukraine said that they would consider going to war in April of 2021 to take back these territories. That wasn't Russia threatening war. It was Ukraine threatening to go to war to take these areas back. So Russia then continued to say, hey, we're not going to do that. So they had this big buildup, and it lasted through the rest of the year. And then, as you know from some of our shows you've probably seen, in December 2021, Putin offered another opportunity of negotiated settlement. It was not as good as the terms of the Minsk, but it was pretty good by this time, and it centered on neutrality by the Ukrainian side. That's what they needed. Neutrality would stop it. You had Stoltenberg admit earlier or toward the end of last year that Putin told them, there wouldn't be a war if you'll declare neutrality and there will be no NATO for Ukraine. He said, no, we're not going to do that. And then in January, I think it was December, Stoltenberg emphatically went out and told, in very defiant language, that the West was still going to bring in Ukraine and Georgia into NATO. And it appears then that Russia just said, then there's no point in anything else. And then that war was launched. Then very shortly after that, they had the negotiated settlement possibilities in Istanbul in March and April of 2022. Again, Putin was willing to negotiate, wanted to negotiate, and we rejected it. And now we are where we are. So whatever you want to say about the war, what you can't say is that it was totally unprovoked. But that's what our government keeps telling you. They're lying to you to make you think that the war is justified. It's not. What we need to do is end it. And then now let's look later on in the war. So in 2023, there was a summer offensive that the Ukraine side launched. And we'd been building up for a half a year on this, providing thousands of armored vehicles, millions of shells of rounds, training, intelligence support, tanks, Bradleys, armored personnel carriers from U.S., France, Germany, U.K. I mean, all kinds of stuff. Everything we had. And you may recall, we've shown where Petraeus went on shortly before that. Things started in late May, I believe it was, of 2023, and said that Ukraine is going to win. They're going to drive through to the Russian, the Azov coast, split the Russians, cut off the land bridge, and move into a position to where in 24 that they can continue to sit them out. He said, Petraeus actually said, I think that the Russian defenses may crumble and crack. That's what he said. And instead, that's the opposite of what happened. As I wrote at the time, not because I'm brilliant, you don't have to be brilliant. You just have to be willing to look at reality on the ground. And I said that this is going to be disaster. There is almost no chance of success. I said, even if Ukraine did manage to get as many as like 50 kilometers deep, even that wouldn't be enough. But the likelihood is that they wouldn't get that far. To my surprise, they didn't even get as far as I thought. I thought they may get 20 to 30 kilometers. They didn't even get 10. And it was literally barely a denting of the line. They didn't penetrate the main line of defense anywhere, and there were 5 main lines of defense. So it was self-evident that none of the fundamentals necessary to conduct an offensive operation into a dug-in enemy force were present. No one should have thought they were going to win. And yet, 6 months into the counteroffensive, when it was patently obvious that everything had failed, you had John Kirby try to tell you this.
If by exit strategy he's talking about an end of the war, I'd offer this. Mr. Putin could end it today if he just pulled his troops out of Ukraine where they don't belong. That probably isn't going to happen. The Ukrainians want this to end immediately, and we all want to see this war end. But it's got to end on terms that President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people can accept. Their country has been invaded. Imagine how Americans would react if it was on our soil. They want Russian forces out of their soil. We want to help them succeed on the battlefield so that if and when President Zelensky, and only President Zelensky can determine when it's time to sit down with President Putin, that he can sit down and have a diplomatic dialogue with the wind at his back and with some strength.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Putin could end it tomorrow by just leaving. Why would he? Why would he do that? He's been in a fight at that point for about a year and a half, a little over a year and a half. And he was succeeding. His plan was starting to succeed. So why would he leave? And to just mock him and say, yeah, he could do that, that's fine. It plays well because people don't like Putin. But what that does is it covers over the fact that our strategy is disastrous. And that's actually part of a bigger problem. We don't actually have a strategy. And let me drive that home a minute. Anytime you do anything, any kind of business that someone runs, any kind of an operation that somebody does, or even some personal plan that you got to have a strategy. You got to have some idea what you want to accomplish, and you got to know what it takes to succeed, what your resources are, how long it might take, and what are the chances of success or not. Because you're not going to start a business, for example, if it's going to require $20 million and you have like 150. $150, that's not going to quite be enough. So it would be foolish to start something you couldn't finish, but we don't even have a strategy for that. So aside from Austin saying we wanted to weaken Russia, whatever that meant, we don't have an exit strategy. So when we tried this operation here for this offensive, which predictably failed, they don't know what to do next. And instead of admitting that, instead of recognizing belatedly even, God, we just made a mistake here. We got to do something different. Instead, one of the senior NATO officials just a week or so ago was being interviewed by a European news outlet, and an Admiral Bauer was asked about the 2023 offensive. He's asked, can we still win? And then he pivots to the 23 offensive.
Do you think that Ukraine has still an opportunity and possibility? There isn't a possibility for Ukraine to win.
Yes. And I think we have been overly optimistic in 2023 when we supported the efforts of Ukraine with regard to the counteroffensive in the summer, in the spring, early summer. And we have done that with, we as not NATO, but the 15 nations that support Ukraine have done that through weapon systems, ammunition, training of Ukrainian soldier in a lot of nations, developing the military plans and things like that. So that was done. And then, as with many things in our societies, people think if you plan for it, then it will be successful.
I really couldn't believe that last part there. He actually said that. And when you watch it in context, I thought maybe he's going to say something else like, but that's not how it really works. But he didn't. If you just plan it and you want it to happen, it'll happen. No, it won't. And you weren't just over optimistic in the 2023 offensive. You were blind. And it was shocking that the highest ranking people in the NATO alliance, that the highest ranking people in the United States actually thought that that's what would happen, that they would succeed. There was no way they were going to succeed. It was patently obvious if you looked at the ground. If you were willing to look at the reality, you knew that wasn't going to happen. But now that you see here, we're into the third year of this war, and we're still either self-delusion, lying, or we have hysterically bad ability to analyze situations. I'm not sure which it is, but I know that this is not going in a good direction. And it has to be something that we fix and fix really quick. But it doesn't look like we're going to, because now then here of late, you have the French saying that now that they see that the tide is definitely turning, not just did the offensive fail last year, but now then Russia's offensive counteroffensive is starting to work, and they are making progress literally all across the front line. So what should we do then? Should we recognize that things aren't working, that let's try to have a negotiated settlement, that let's, cut bait and it's to say, hey, let's cut our losses here before it gets even worse? No, you have the president of France trying to double down.
On the other hand, they have not decided to send any troops at all. And they let you know as soon as you said that.
We can always come back to that, and I'm going to get to the bottom of it.
That's what the French are asking.
But they're
you to
absolutely right. But I say today, we've decided on this, and it's a change. We decided it in Paris. It's the start of a new awakening. Then, I tell you, we'll do what's necessary to achieve our goal.
A new awakening. Man, I wish that awakening was that we're finally going to see reality and we're going to see things the way they really are. And we're going to make sane, logical, rational choices that benefit our alliance, that benefit our national interests. And then we're going to take action appropriately. Instead, it's like he's staying in this fantasy land. Look, France isn't going to do anything. Do you realize that France makes about 3,000 artillery shells a month? The max capacity they have right now is about 3,000 shells per month. Russia's making about 250,000 shells per month. France can't sustain anything, and France has given so much of their stuff away to Ukraine, their own military capacity is weakened. They literally can't get into a war with Russia. It would be suicide to do, which means it's possible that they will. But look, Putin is not going to just sit passively by and let this happen. If France takes foolish action like that, or if Poland does, because Poland's also talked about possibly moving troops into the western part of Ukraine, Putin's not going to sit passively by. This is what he said in late February, very bluntly.
They're talking about the possibility of sending NATO military contingents to Ukraine. But we remember the fate of those who once sent their contingents to our country. But now, the consequences for possible interventionists will be much more tragic. We also have weapons. They know about this. As I just said, we also have a weapon that can hit targets on their territory. And they should understand that what they're doing now, trying to scare the whole world, it does risk a conflict with nuclear weapons, which means the destruction of civilization.
Now, you would think that, okay, now that we're talking about the possibility of nuclear weapons directly in retaliation or response, if a Western NATO military alliance moves into conflict with Russian forces in its war with Ukraine, then, okay, hang on, that's a different deal. We need to cool the jets here a little bit. That's what you would think that any rational person would do, even one that hates Vladimir Putin. It's rational to say, okay, let's don't push the guy to where he feels like he has a need to use nuclear weapons, especially because we know that's in their doctrine. They use tactical nuclear weapons as a matter of thought. It's not an irrational thing. It's actually part of how they consider doing national level operations. What does America think about this? What is one of America's most accomplished generals, a 3-star retired general who once led the U.S. Army in Europe? What does he say? Because a lot of people listen to him. He's on shows and television channels all the time. Ben Hodges says, yeah, don't worry about it.
I think there is almost zero chance that he would use a nuclear weapon. First of all, he doesn't have the trump card. We're a nuclear power also, and he understands that. I think that the Kremlin recognizes and accepts President Biden's warning of catastrophic consequences should they use a nuclear weapon.
Have you ever stopped to think just for a second the irrationality of what he said there and why he thinks that Vladimir Putin should listen to the warnings of Biden that he has a nuclear retaliation, but we shouldn't listen to the warnings of Putin that he has nuclear weapons and would use them? It's irrational. And now, thank God, he's out of power. He's just a civilian now. He has no power or anything else, but he does have influence and people listen to him. And that kind of just twisted mentality and the inability to see things the way they are afflicts our political class as well. So let me show you just a couple of scenes, one from a Republican, one from a Democrat, because like I told you, this is not an R or a D thing. This is an elite thing, and they both have the same sickness right here. Here is Schumer after a passage of a bill that he claimed was going to make a big difference in the war.
Today, we witnessed one of the most historic and consequential bills to have ever passed the Senate. It's certainly been years, perhaps decades, since the Senate passed a bill that so greatly impacts not just our national security, not just the security of our allies, but the security of Western democracy.
That is breathtaking, and it's just nuttiness. That all the things that our American U.S. Senate has done over years, this is one of the most consequential. It was a bill that was passed. You saw that February 23rd, I think it was. We're in April now. That was one half of a bill that was supposed to go to the House, which to this day has still not been voted on. The earliest that any version is going to get voted on is going to be starting on sometime the 9th in this month. And we'll see if that happens. I have my doubts. But even if it does come out, even if the Speaker of the House decided that, you know what, I'm just going to sign off on whatever Schumer said, and we're going to give it to him with no changes or anything else, $60 billion would go to Ukraine. That won't make any difference at all in this war. Ukraine has a human resource problem. They have a shortage of manpower. They also had this huge disparity in artillery shells. $60 billion is, only a portion of that is actually going to go to Ukraine. Most of it is going to go to American arms dealers. Did you know that? Not much of it is actually going to go to Ukraine. So it's going to even have not much of an impact on the ground in Ukraine anyway. You see these guys here from, I think it was December, when Zelensky met with all these executives of all the big military industrial companies. They're loving it. Of course, they don't care where the money goes. As long as it goes through them, it gets funneled out there. They're cool with it, but it's not going to make any difference in the war. I don't know if Schumer is unaware of that or if he doesn't care about it. Maybe he only cares about the money, that maybe he cares about the support that he'll get for his next reelection campaign or more jobs in his state. I don't know. I can't talk for what his motivation is, but I can tell you authoritatively, he is flat dead wrong. This will not be a consequential bill, even if it passes. It won't make any difference in the war. Russia has trumped everything that Ukraine does. No matter how many cards you put down, Russia has more to put down. Every month they get stronger and stronger in air defense, air capacity. They actually are still making aircraft, helicopters, and jets. They are repairing things that go down. They have a logistics system. They have an electronic warfare system that is continuing to escalate in capabilities. Upwards of 80% of Ukrainian drones don't even make it to the battlefield because they get knocked out with electronic means. 80%. Meanwhile, their ability to make drones is just continuing to go through the roof. It's getting stronger and stronger and stronger. Their missile systems are getting more powerful and more accurate. They're getting larger caliber weapons that are firing in there. Ukraine can only shoot down about 20% of them now. Russia's firing more and they're shooting down less of them. You see, every way this goes is going in Russia's favor. Russia now is recruiting about 30,000 troops per month. Ukraine is lucky if they get a handful of thousand forced into compliance. People who don't even want to fight. They're being literally grabbed off the streets. Every capacity one looks at, Ukraine is going to lose the war, and they are losing the war. The longer we go to ignoring these things, the greater the risk is going to be that we get sucked into a war, either in the Israel, we get sucked into a war with Iran, or somewhere else in the Middle East, or here in Russia. Because both of those things are possible, and they would be catastrophic for American interest. There is no reason on this planet that America needs to be in a war with anyone. Our national security capacity in a defensive role will keep anybody from unprovoked attack against us because we do have a genuine ability to make punishment on somebody. But if we go looking for trouble, if we go fighting a war in the Middle East again, and we have to deploy into Iran, if we have to go into Russia or into the Europe and to fight against Russia right there, we don't have that capacity, folks. We can't sustain a war. We can respond to things, but we don't have the ability to sustain a war. Our missile capacity can last literally a matter of weeks in a high intensity warfare. We don't have enough artillery shells. We've given millions of them away. Our capacity to produce new ones we're trying to ramp it up, but it's very slow. It's only going to be, I think, 85,000 per month by the end of the year, which is nowhere near enough to sustain a war for us. Forget about helping Ukraine. They wouldn't even know. Ukraine or Israel wouldn't get anything at that point. We wouldn't even have enough. And then, of course, you have problems with recruiting. You have problems with we've been training in the wrong kinds of things. There's some weakness in the force. We cannot fight a sustained war right now. And of course, I told you at the beginning, we could go and even talking about the issue with the China-Taiwan issue. And if we get sucked in there, we're in a world of hurt then. And that's assuming it doesn't go nuclear anywhere. Just conventionally, we would be just gashed. Why would anyone want to toy with having American soldiers who signed up to defend our country go and fight on behalf of Israel in a war against Iran that we don't even want to fight, that we have no business fighting at all, and nothing to gain, everything to lose, nothing to gain, and even worse in Russia, because it could go nuclear. Why is it that our country is stocked at the top of with the elite class with people who are lying to you, who are intentionally deceiving you on things, or have just catastrophically bad analysis capacity? It's hard to say in any category which of those things are in these given areas, but they're all at play and to our risk. And we have got to get to the place to where we finally do the right thing and stop doing these insane things and having these crazy ideas that we're incapable or that we're impervious to loss. We can do whatever we want. We'll always succeed. And that we can just say whatever we want and it'll happen, because it's not. We live in a world where you have to make trade-offs, where you have to say, all right, let's do a balance of power. Here's how many Russia has. Here's how many China has. Here's what the issues are in the Middle East. Here's our resources. Here's our capacities, our strengths, our weaknesses. All right, here's what we can do. This would benefit our country. This may be right on the edge. So let's think about whether we should do it. This stuff right here, there's no upside, so I'm not going to do that. That's common sense. That's just basic analytic capability. Most normal people do that every day in whatever their sphere of life is. But our leaders of our country aren't doing any of it. And they are putting us more and more into a risk where we could face a catastrophic war somewhere that can have only downside. And as I said at the beginning, we're on a path right now where there is no upside for us. There is no path. There is no outcome that we're seeking in either of these two areas where America ends up in a stronger place. None. But right now, the more likelihood outcome, if we can avoid war with Russia, is that Putin ends up stronger than he was before February 2022. And people's heads are going to explode in the NATO and in Europe. And they're already terrified, talking about we're in a pre-war position. And even after this is over, they're going to start getting ready for another war. We'll talk about that another time because that's beyond the scope of this. But people are definitely talking about that. And I mean openly at the highest levels in NATO countries and European countries. That is insane. We should be working diplomatically to lower tensions, to escalate economic opportunities, to escalate freedom for people to be able to live in peace. That's how you avoid war. That's how you have a high quality of life. That's how you have a good future. These things aren't that hard, but it requires a major mental change from what we've been doing. And let me tell you what we should be doing. If I were the president right now, or if anyone who's sane were president right now, what they would say is, all right, here's what we're going to do. First of all, in the Israel-Hamas war, we're going to tell Israel that you are your own sovereign country. You make your own choices, Netanyahu. You are right. If you want to go it alone, that's your prerogative. You can do that. You're not going to do it with my bombs. You're not going to do it with our intelligence. You're not going to do it with anything of ours. We are not going to help you at all because you are pursuing a policy that is antithetical to our interests, to our values, and you're putting our security at risk by your reckless actions across the Middle East. And we're not going to support it anymore. Now, if you want to dramatically change your course and contain this war here and use targeted operations to go specifically and only after Hamas, which will take a lot longer, and protect the population, which is in our interest as well, and seek a two-state solution, then we'll help you. But that's the conditions. That's what we should tell them in all love, tough love, because we support Israel. I have for a long time, my whole life, and still do, the Israeli people. I want the Israeli people to have peace and security. I also want the Palestinian people to have peace and security, and both can as long as changes are being willing to be made. There's no easy path. And because of the damage already done, really by both sides, it'll be a generational issue. But we can start that path. But we can do so in a way that preserves peace, or at least stability, for both sides right now. And America can help bring that about by saying we're going to use our leverage and saying you're on your own if you want to do it. And I promise you, Israel doesn't have the bombs and the ammunition and the industrial capacity to sustain a long term, especially to fight a pointless war with Iran without us. They can't do it. That's what we should do. And if Israel wants to continue to act crazy at the government level, we can't stop them from that. But we can say we're not going to get ourselves sucked into a war. I'm not going to lose one American soldier in a fight for somebody else's benefit. That's what we should do. Next, let's go to the Russia-Ukraine war. We should go back to February or March, April of 2022 and say, let's see what we can get done here. We should tell Zelensky right away, the funding for offensive operations is off the table. There is no possibility that we're going to hold for 2024 so that you can go on offense in 2025. If you want to do that, again, your sovereign country, you can do whatever you want. You won't do it with any of our help. Now, that may sound cruel. It's not. That's actually the wisest, sanest course we could do. We can say, we will support you, and we will even give you more support and ammunition and weapons to hold the current line so that you can negotiate from a position of some kind of, influence. It's already decisively in Putin's affair, in his side, but you can help increasing the cost to him to give him incentive to want to make some negotiations and some settlements that actually are beneficial to you. The bottom line is still possible to have an independent Ukraine that can conduct its own foreign policy and having relations economic with the West and have a future. That's still possible if we are the strong and say we're going to start doing what makes sense and what's realistically possible. It is still really hard given the late hour and the fact that Russia now is on the move, and there's no guarantee they would accept even a negotiated settlement. They may push for outright victory. I hope they don't, but if they do, we can still help Ukraine defend itself to raise the cost to increase the incentive for Russia to want to negotiate. But if they don't, we have to strengthen the western border of NATO so that Putin doesn't have any fantasies about trying to come in there, which he can't because he doesn't have the capacity. So we actually can be safe. America and NATO can be safe because Russia doesn't have the capacity to make good on this and let the whole eastern flank do what they've been talking about, increase their national defense spending as individual nations to defend themselves, and Russia's not going to go in to attack them. They're not going to. That's what we should do. That has the best chance of stability in Europe. And again, it's going to be a generation because of the damage and the harm done by both sides to each other. No one's going to want to talk about friendship or peace in our lifetimes, probably. It's going to be beyond that, at least another generation away. But we can start on that process. That's realistic. That's doable. With the resources we have, Russia has incentive to stop the war. We have incentive to stop the war and start the slow, painful process of rebuilding. Because, folks, when this war is over one way or other, Russia's not going anywhere. Europe's not going anywhere. Everybody's going to have to learn how to live together in peace, in some kind of relationship together. That's always happened. All wars are like that. They eventually end. People have to learn how to get along with each other. Look at us in Vietnam. We fought that stupid war for 10 years, and now we have good relations with Vietnam. That kind of thing is possible in a generation from now. The sooner you start on that, the better it's going to be for everybody. That, folks, is what we need to do. That is how we can bring stability to these chaotic situations to prevent war from breaking out in any of these cases. Now, that's what if I were put in charge today, that's exactly what I would do. But there's so much volatility right now, and we still have all these same people in charge. And like I said at the outset of this, Iran is saying today that they're going to have some kind of big retaliation, and God only knows what's going to happen after that. There's going to be a lot of possibilities for something bad because I can't imagine that Iran's going to back down. I can't imagine they're going to allow their embassy to be blown up in the capital city of another country and not take some sort of really big action in return. We'll see. We'll see how it works out. But you can count on us because we are unintimidated and uncompromised. I don't care if anybody likes or doesn't like these suggestions. These are realistic. This will help our country and it will help our allies. This is realistic. These other things that our country is doing are not. That's what you need to know. And that is your deep dive for today. Thanks for liking and subscribing. Please share this with your friends, and we will look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.